Catherine Ebine, I think you'd like to chime in here as you talk with a number of top military psychologists, and even those at the beginning who were recruited into an APA committee that would investigate whether psychologists should continue. People like Kleinman and others who you quote saying, I think Mitchell and Jessen have caused more harm to American national security than they'll ever understand.
Yeah. I mean, what was interesting is that there was suspicion initially that the psychologists who participated on this APA committee that basically sort of approved participation in interrogations, that they were somehow behind these coercive tactics. What you really had was almost what I describe as a Wizard of Oz scenario. You had Mitchell and Jessen behind the curtain, driving, you know, the sort of good name of psychologists, as it were, into this very murky, dark area. And I think, you know, what's really important in the debate going forward among psychologists is the extent to which psychologists loaned their names and loaned their credentials and their PhDs to this kind of activity, and essentially were used by the Bush administration to provide a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for the people who were, you know, doing these interrogations, because the logic, which I think Mark had mentioned, is, you know, this circular logic. So long as there are trained psychologists from the SEER program who are on site at these interrogations, who are saying that these detainees can withstand this treatment, are not being harmed psychologically, then it's not torture. So, you know, you've got this sort of tortured logic, which is the phrase that has come up, but it's this sort of self-justifying loop in which professionals are loaning their credentials to this kind of activity. And you see the same thing in the Office of Legal Counsel, where you have, you know, lawyers loaning their credentials to approving what are clear violations of the Geneva Conventions.
Karen Doran-Steele, this is both a global issue and, as is usually the case, a local one, because Mitchell Jessen is right here in Spokane. There were local protests after your reports came out. Describe what happened.
Yes, so we're about a month after our first stories and some of the follow-ups on the APA debate. There was a street protest, maybe 36 people showed up. Many of them were psychology students from local colleges who said, not in our names should this be done, and this is a violation of everything we've been taught in schools. And there were intelligence agents there. We couldn't determine who they were, but they were photographing everybody in the crowd. But Spokane is not a place that's given to street protests normally, although there have been some anti-Iraq war protests. But this was an unusual event, and it triggered some passion here. And
yet they continue, and they not only have Mitchell Jessen, but little other companies that are right in the American Legion Hall.
Yeah, there's a cluster of national security companies that all come out of this, out of the SEER and JPRA program, that are still here and functioning.
I went over to the Spokesman Review yesterday. I was speaking to the editor. I said, have you all ever been able to speak to Mitchell Jessen? I mean, they're a local company. And he said, no, they do not
No,
respond.
They just gave us the same response that you read earlier in the program, that they condemn torture.
Mark Benjamin, do you think we're going to see any arrests? Do you think, well, President Obama has said they're not going after CIA interrogators, questioners. What do you think?
No, I don't think we're going to see any arrests. And I think that the significance of what the Obama administration has done over the last few days, or announced over the last few days, has been largely missed, which is, if you look at the president's statements and you combine them with the statements of Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff, and Eric Holder, the attorney general, if you put those together, you will see that over the last couple of days, the Obama administration has announced that no one, not the people who carried out the torture program, or the people who designed the program, or the people that authorized the program, or the people who said that it was legal even though they knew that it frankly wasn't. None of those people will ever face charges. The Attorney General has announced that not only that, the government will pay the legal fees for anybody who is brought up on any charges anywhere in the world or has to go before Congress. They will be provided attorneys. And not only that, they have given this blanket immunity, if you will, in return for nothing. I mean, in other words, you know, as you said at the top of the program, Obama yesterday, President Obama was at the CIA and called these things mistakes, even though they were very carefully designed, and hasn't demanded anything in return for this immunity. I mean, you know, in other words, it's not like the Obama administration said, hey, let's take a close look at this and let's have some people come forward and testify, and let's take a close look at this program and see if the claims of the former Vice President Dick Cheney are really true, that we really did get some good information out of this program. It really was effective. The Obama administration has demanded nothing and has announced, you know, effectively that the story's over and nobody will be held to account ever.
I want to thank you, Mark Benjamin of Salon.com in Washington, D.C., Catherine Eban in New York at the Firehouse Studio, VF.com. Your pieces appear. But before I say goodbye to you, Karen Dornsteele, I wanted to ask you about one other issue that is very close to here in Spokane, and it's the issue of the Hanford Reservation, for which your coverage, Wasteland, won a George Polk Award. Well, on Hanford, on the campaign trail last year, Senator Obama at the time was asked about the Hanford Nuclear Reservation cleanup. This is him being questioned at a campaign stop in Pendleton, Oregon, last May.
Every year, the government promises to fund the Hanford cleanup project in eastern Washington. And every year, they find a way to take away the funding, which results a lot of lost jobs. Washington's current policy seems to be the solution to pollution is dilution.
Oh.
What is your policy?
Here's something that you will rarely hear from a politician, and that is, I'm not familiar with the Hanford site, and so I don't know exactly what's going on there. Now, having said that, I promise you I'll learn about it by the time I leave here on the ride back to the airport.
That was presidential candidate Obama. Karen Dornsteele, you're very familiar with the Hanford Reservation. Tell us very briefly what it is and what are the latest developments around this site.
Hanford is the nation's largest plutonium production complex that made the plutonium for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. In the course of weapons production, it sent a lot of radiation into the air, contaminating the region. There's now a major lawsuit with over 2,000 plaintiffs wending its way through the federal courts. It was filed in 1991, seeking compensation. So far, the lawyers defending the government contractors have racked up about $60 million in defense costs, and not one sick person has received a dime. So it's a justice issue. Again, sovereign immunity is being claimed by the government, and the government agreed to indemnify these contractors who came in.
How far is it from Spokane? How large is the Hanford Reservation?
Hanford is about 130 miles from Spokane, and it's about half the size of Maryland. It's a huge facility.
And who are these 2,000 people? The
2,000 people were largely farmers and other rural people who lived in the vicinity from the mid-40s through the early 50s when the emissions from the plutonium factories, mostly of radioactive iodine, were the heaviest.
And finally, your piece, Wasteland, was about the corruption and the amount of money that was spent.
That's correct. President Obama may not have heard of it, but this is a huge scandal in that $50 billion has been spent or will be spent over the 30 years that is planned to clean up Hanford, and there's been a lot of wasted money, and that's what we looked at.
Karen Dornsteele, I want to thank you for being with us. The Spokesman Review, you're no longer there. I went to the offices. I saw the big spaces, the desks replaced by couches now. So many people have, well, you took a buyout.
Yes, I did. It's sad. We're a privately owned company, and we've had a series of layoffs since 2001, just like newspapers nationwide, where it's tough times for the newspaper industry.
Thanks very much for being with us, and congratulations on the George Polk Award you won for Wasteland for your coverage of the Hanford Reservation. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we return here in Spokane from our break, we're going to talk about another kind of reservation, the Spokane Indian Reservation, and another kind of radioactive pollution. We'll talk about uranium mining and its effect on the Indian community here in Washington. Stay with us.